there is evidence that social media promotes protests all over the world. Also, recently, a number of papers document a relationship between social media and hate crime.
Welcome to VoxDev Talks. My name is Tim Phillips. The Reducing Conflict and Improving Performance in the Economy Recipe Programme was established in April 2024 as a CEPR research initiative to provide better understanding of the links between conflict, economic growth and public policies. Now, it's organised around themes, and if you are a regular listener to VoxDev Talks, you will remember in one of our previous episodes, we discussed the theme of post-conflict peacebuilding and reconstruction. Another one of the themes is the link between conflict and hate speech, social media use, media bias, and propaganda. Maria Petrova of the Barcelona School of Economics and Augustin Tapsoba of the Toulouse School of Economics are the theme leaders. They both join me now to talk about what we know on this topic and what recipe might help us find out. Maria, welcome.
Hi, Tim.
Augustin, welcome as well.
Thank you very much for having us.
How is social media, which is really what we tend to think about now on this topic, how is that similar to the historical use of media like radio or newspapers, and how is it unique and different?
Sometimes internet and social media have persuasive effects on people's behavior through information channels, pretty similar to traditional media. For example, Manacorde and Tessay 2020 paper on Mueller and Schwartz 2023 for Trump tweets and hate crimes in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
However, sometimes horizontal flows of information and coordination role of social media becomes important, like it was the case in our paper on social media and protest in Russia, or another paper of ours on xenophobia and hate crime in Russia.
Social media presents a lot of data, a lot of unstructured data, doesn't it? Does this aspect of it make economic research particularly challenging in this area?
Some interactions among users are not open to the general public, so it's difficult to get access to it. Content is more difficult to collect as compared with traditional media because sometimes API is not available or it is expensive as it is on Twitter right now.
And for economists to be involved in this area, what skills can they bring? And is it useful for them to collaborate with other disciplines, or can they learn from other disciplines to be able to do good research here?
Economists analyze the data on social interactions, and this is economists' primary skill. More recently, I've seen more and more collaborations with computer scientists and political scientists, who are typically very helpful with the data collection.
Economists are also bringing a lot of theory into discipline, so they draw on many other fields, but they have a very specific perspective in how they want to understand the motivations of different actors in the conflict environments that are bringing this theory modeling of the incentives. They're also bringing the toolbox. So we have all these causal inference methods that are now very common for economists that are also reaching other sciences. But I think economists have a little bit of a leap towards them. So they're bringing these two aspects in order to produce answers to the interesting questions that are in there.
Let's look at some of the interesting questions that are covered in this theme. First of all, let's look at what social media is actually doing. I remember the original concept of social media back when we first all heard about it a couple of decades ago. The argument was that it would help bring us all together. When we are researching it now, 2025, we usually think of its potential to create protest and conflict instead. Have we seen a lot of evidence that social media is actually a source of protest and conflict?
Yes, there is evidence that social media promotes protests all over the world. We find it in our paper on Russia. We've seen it for Africa in Monacord and Tessay paper, and all over the world in Ferguson and Malina paper. Pierskala and Hollenbach show some evidence on the relationship between mobile technology and political violence. Also, recently, a number of papers document a relationship between social media and hate crime, such as Mueller and Schwartz for United States and Germany.
Is there any counter evidence that social media has fulfilled its original dream, its idea of making conflict less likely, of bringing us together?
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh,
However, there is evidence that traditional media can help post-conflict reconciliation, such as 2009, Paluk and Green 2009, Lewin and Mukan 2019. So I think that maybe social media will find a way to do this.
We must hope so. One of the arguments that we often hear is that we all live in media bubbles now, not just social media bubbles, but media bubbles in all our choices. And that's blamed for the political and social polarization in high-income countries. In development situations, low-income countries, do we have evidence that long-run media-driven polarization is a source of conflict?
Our paper with Leo Bustin and Georgy Yegorovs actually suggests that theoretically social media should increase polarization, and we correspondingly observe an increase in xenophobia and hate crime in Russia.
Now, there is also the potential for social media to be a recruitment tool for armed groups, or even just a tool which encourages people to espouse violent ideologies. Is there the potential for that?
There is some emerging literature that the social media were in fact used as a recruitment tool for ISIS, like in Villarreal 2015. I expect more papers to come on that.
The good side of this, as you mentioned already, when we spoke to Salma Musa and Lisa Hultman about post-conflict peace building and reconstruction, as you said, there is an argument that media can help in reconciliation.
Yes, as I mentioned before, there is evidence that traditional media can promote post-conflict reconciliation if they broadcast particular type of content, like Paluk and Green, Lewin and Mukan. Thus, I think that sometimes even social media can help.
Now, your theme also covers attempts to improve forecasting of future conflicts. Augustin, I think this is your area. What sort of methods or data are we talking about here?
There's been various forecasting methods that have been developed over the years. So I'm going to focus on what people call in the literature the hard forecasting problem. They established that there is a lot of persistence in peace or violence. So you have many things that can predict why is it that some areas are more peaceful than others. But those are not really what policymakers care about. Talk to any policymaker, they'll be able to tell you that from their own experience. So the hard problem is going to be about predicting outbursts of violence in previously peaceful environments. To try to leverage the wealth of information that you have in newspaper articles. Reason is that provides an idea of what some people may call the socio-economic elite, writing about the day-to-day events, and it's available on newspapers and for a very long period of time. So you can leverage all this information to figure out what are the key topics that people have been talking about and use machine learning techniques to try to tell you whether there is any connection between certain topics and the occurrence of violence or not, based on the history of violence. This has been very successful at identifying certain topics that are positively correlated with the onset of violence, but also topics that are interestingly, even negatively correlated, meaning whenever they pop up in the news, it's less likely that you observe any that's happening afterwards. And all of these methods have helped in improving the quality of the forecasting methods that are being used at the moment that constitute the cutting edge.
What's the policy implication of this, Augustin? Because if we get better at forecasting the potential for conflict, what can we do about that?
Yeah, that's a good question and a very interesting one.
What is it legitimate to do about that?
You have a lot of policymakers, especially NGOs, people that are working in humanitarian sectors and things like that, that are interested in having early warning systems that would tell them where is a high risk of violence so that they can prepare and provide relief in a timely manner. Because it takes time to deliver or help people in difficult situations. Mm-hmm. So whenever you can anticipate to some extent, it is super useful and it has proven useful for them. And sometimes when they're operating in difficult environments, knowing that there's a risk of escalation could also help them put their staff and people working with them out of harm's way. So that's one way to look at it. Another type of policymakers that are interested in these forecasting exercises is basically those that are big players on the international diplomacy landscape that are able to negotiate or talk to different parties that are in a given conflict so that they avoid escalations that can lead to full-blown conflicts, because usually people fight because there's misinformation. They don't have the same set of information and they engage in some retaliatory actions that can lead to violence breaking. Being able to have third-party actors that can see the early signs and bring people around the table or use some sort of leverage to make sure that you don't get to that point could also be useful. And those are the two types of policy applications of these type of forecasting exercises.
Many people have become frustrated with the large technology companies that control social media, make the argument that they should be doing more to keep hate speech off their platform, to control the use of propaganda. These are complicated arguments, but do we have evidence that if they were more active, that it would have an effect?
There is evidence that social media regulation indeed can reduce hate speech online and hate crime, such as in the papers by Jimenez Duran and co-authors and in Andres and Slivko. These papers talk about regulations in Germany that made social media companies accountable for the hate speech of their users. And they find that this policy was effective.
From too little control to arguably too much, we have also seen some autocratic governments who have always tried to control media switching off internet access. Does this tactic work for them? Are we seeing it being used more often?
Actually, some evidence that banning social media can backfire.
Yeah.
Like Molly Roberts' paper on switching off Instagram in China, because people who liked Instagram for their own reasons, for example, to share cute cats pictures, they actually install VPN and learn about internet outside of Great Chinese Firewall.
Finally, I want to ask both of you, the purpose of Recipe is to stimulate research, fill in some of the gaps in what we know. Where would you like to see more research on these topics? Maria, first of all.
I expect to see in these years to come more research on social media, because most of the research so far has been done on traditional media. We also need to know more about the mechanisms, especially historical mechanisms, and on the countries outside of traditional focus of conflict literature.
Augustin, where would you like to see some new work?
Little step back to give a general overview of how our team is organized, also based on that we've been working on, that is going to come out as a review paper that we hope is going to be interesting for both policymakers and academics. basically we have a first part that Maria has talked about how media and especially social media affects conflict and the propensity of people to engage into all sorts of violence. And I've been working on another part, which is how conflict maps into socioeconomic impacts on different economic agents. Mm-hmm. And in the Information Matters, there is a large set of people that are changing the day-to-day decisions from investment in education to investment in stock markets based on the environment. And conflict environments are very risky environments that lead to people taking costly measures that could have long-term consequences. And basically on this second part would be super interesting, as Maria mentioned for the first part. Most of the research is focused on traditional media and role of social media, and especially given how important it has become in our day-to-day lives and how many people are getting information through those channels, how these sort of affect their mental well-being, their productivity at work, the decisions to seek medical service or education in conflict-prone environments, whether the perceived risk and all the information they're getting on social media lead to them overreacting or being affected more than they should be by the underlying violence risk. So I think that's a key thing that would be super useful to have in this second part. And then the third part is about the part about forecasting. Mm-hmm. And in there, again, it's the same story. So people have used traditional media sources for improving forecasting because it's readily available and it has been around for the last 100 years. But now there's a lot of content that is coming on social media. And now it's not only some socioeconomic elites writing about what is happening. Now you have anybody that can write some content on social media that can go viral. So there's the question of can we leverage the richness of all this information to improve our ability to forecast or anticipate increases in violence risk in different areas with maybe more spatial granularity rather than having country level forecastings? Can we, at a very local level, figure out what's the underlying risk in these areas? I think those are going to be the interesting parts to see in the few months to years to come.
Well, these are fascinating topics. Let's hope that work comes through. I'll be looking out for what's happening on your topic on Recipe. Thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you, Maria.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Augustine.
Thank you very much.
Check out also our episode on peace building. It is called Peacemaking, Peacebuilding and Post-War Reconstruction. It was broadcast on the 5th of February this year. In that episode, we spoke to Salman Musa of UCLA and Lisa Hultman of Uppsala University. But for our topic today and all the other Recipe topics as well, you will find information about the project at recipe.cepr.org. This has been a VoxDev Talk. Best way to make sure you don't miss an episode. Follow us. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. Our past episodes, as always, at voxdev.org, where you also find articles about the topics we feature. And if you like what you hear, please tell someone else about us and leave us a review as well. VoxDev Talks is a Talk Normal production. The assistant producer is Megan Bieber and our editor is Andrei Zargarian. Thanks to Oliver Haney and Iman Siddiq at VoxDev.